How's it going, guys? So in today's tutorial, we're going to be creating this animation right here in geometry nodes, having some fun with a couple of hair particles. This is a pretty hefty one, so let me tell you all of the things that we're going to have to do to make this look really cool. At the very start, we're just simply going to instance the arms, displace them, and decimate the heck out of them to get the look that we're trying to get. Then we're going to create a wireframe system in geometry nodes and add random spheres to give it a really organic look. And then next is adding in the lighting for the scene. After that, we're going to add materials to the lights to create some really beautiful glowing effects and be able to randomize them so they blink around and give us something to animate. And lastly, we're going to add some hair particles to kind of fill out the scene, add some really nice compositing to make it feel kind of organic and vintage, and we're going to animate the camera to really make it all look nice and tie it together. So that is all the steps that we're going to be doing over the next 30 minutes to really knock this out. Now, if you didn't see last week's video, this is the step-by-step tutorial that I talked about in a video that I posted a week ago, where I showed an entire project, how I make concert visuals in Blender, but there are more tutorials attached to this project that you can check out on Patreon right now. So this is one of the step-by-step tutorials, but we have several others as a part of this bigger project. If you want to check out my Patreon, I've already uploaded several hours worth of tutorials on the Patreon just this year. Tons of really cool projects. If you want to check that out, that is linked in the description. It's the perfect way to support what I'm doing here on YouTube. With that being said, let's get into the tutorial. All right, let's go ahead and tackle that first step. So what you can do is just go ahead and throw any piece of geometry into your scene. I'm just going to go and use a plane, and I'm going to call this Geo. This is where our geometry nodes is going to sit, and we're going to go ahead and give it a new window, drop down, and we're going to go to the geometry nodes editor. I'm going to hit in, and then click new. So now we can set up an icosphere as our first base object. Then we'll get a instance on point so we can get those cylinders, and we'll get a cylinder as well and plug that into the instance, and they'll show up here. So now what we need to do is get these guys to all point outward, and rotating them is not going to fix the problem. So we need to do a little bit of magic here. So we need to get a line oiler to vector. Now let's play with the cylinder here for a minute. Let's go ahead and give nothing on the fill type, and we're going to give this guy 43 on the side segments, a radius of 0.15, and a depth of 6.5. All right, so now you'll notice some overlapping here. That's because our radius needs to come up, and something like this. I remember mine being 4.44. And there's going to be a sphere that's going to fit in here. And now if we go to the wireframe, you can see this guy is ready to be displaced. He's nice and just full of faces. So that's what we want. Now, just for kind of end result and consistency, what I'm going to do is on the cylinder, I'm going to add in a triangulate node, and that's going to go ahead and just simply triangulate the faces. And it just has a noticeably different look when we go ahead and just decimate it and displace it. Now what we need to do is create a displacement system for these cylinders. So what we're going to do is, first step is always to get a set position node, put it there, and I'm going to get these guys out of the way because we need to add some nodes in this area. So first we're going to get two vector math nodes and set them to multiply, and we'll plug them right into offset. Let's get another one, plug that into the top vector. He is just going to control the scale. We need to get another normal node. The normals are just allowing the displacement and all this stuff to kind of work properly in a organized fashion. And we need to get in so we'll plug the normal into the bottom socket of the vector. Let's get a map range, put the minimum to -1. That's just going to kind of like even it out. We want it to be the opposite of max. So max is +1. Minimum is going to be -1 to keep it all acting properly. And we need to get a noise texture, plug him into value, plug him into vector. And then if you click and drag, we can then displace our cylinders. Was that a lot of work? Yeah, but it also just gives you the most amount of control. You could use a displacement modifier, but you know, whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that displacement down just a little bit and maybe bring my detail off So now what we need to do is decimate it to get the geometry to look a certain way. So it's kind of triangulated and kind of stretched out and minimal. So let's go ahead and just go to our modifiers and add in a decimate. And if we bring that ratio down, you'll notice nothing's happening. That's because we need to go ahead and get in a realized instances node that almost like rasterizes it. Then it actually, you can see it working. So now we can get that nice plexus look that we would want. And then we can, of course, bring that displacement up however we want it to be, which that's so odd that it does that. But this is kind of what we're working with here. And then you can play with that decimate as much as you want. And I'm going to bring the scale of the noise to a 2.5. Bring this down. And you can just play around with these settings until you like what you're getting. I think I'm happy with this. So now that we're here, we need to create a wireframe system. But what we need to do is actually get a new geometry nodes tree. The reason why is because this decimate is decimating everything in this tree when we click on it. So if we were to add our wireframe, add our spheres, it's also going to decimate that. And that would be bad. It would break it. So we need to add in a brand new tree that is not going to be affected by the decimate here. So now what we can do is, so this output right here is all of this stuff. That's the way you got to think about this group, this group input. So first thing, we're going to do a mesh to curve and a curve to mesh. And we're going to get a curve circle to say how thick do we want this to be. Plug that into the profile curve and then bring that radius down to 0.01. And then you can bring your resolution to like 16. We'll notice a change in resolution as we go farther down. So maybe even 7. That'll keep it very, very light on your scene so it's not so dense and high poly. Next thing we need to do is get in a join geometry so we can instance spheres all over this thing. So we're going to get a join geometry. We're going to get a instance on points so that we can start instancing. And again, he is all of the stuff that's in here. So he needs to be our points. Plug that into the join geometry and then get your icosphere or whatever thing you want to instance. You can use a cube if you want to be a little bit more intentional with your subdivision, but we'll bring our radius down on the icosphere node first. Something like this. Bring up your subdivisions and get a set shade smooth node. So now that they're here, just looks like a bunch of berries, we can go ahead and play with their scale. So that's going to be with a color ramp. Plug that into scale and you can see it. All right, it's affecting it. We need to get a noise texture to say how to make it behave. And that is going to be right here. And then what you do is crunch in the color ramp. Black means scale down to 0. White means to scale it down to 100%, which would be this radius specified here. So I don't want anything to be 100% 0, so we'll bring that gray up, and you see all the ones that are gone, they come back. So closer to white, 100%. So we can go to something like this, and then we can just kind of play around with this organic look until we like it. All right. I like this. This looks good. And then we need to add one more object on our join geometry. So we'll get another icosphere. We'll duplicate the set shade smooth. And then we'll just plug that in. And now we have a guy in the middle that we can just subdivide and then bring them up a little bit. All right, we're finished here. Now what I want to do is duplicate this because this isn't enough, but I want them to stay skinny, but I still want more of this to fill out the scene. So the way to pull that off is go back to the first geometry nodes scene, and then what you'll do is get a join geometry. And the easiest way to duplicate something like right here, is to get a transform geometry, which is going to allow us to move around this new thing. And then we'll plug the realize instances into geometry, which is, plugging in everything into him, and then plugging that into join geometry. And if I just go ahead and click and drag on the rotation, you'll notice a brand new unit. How nice. So now we have a much more full scene, and you can go and edit. You can edit this to your heart's desire, however you want it to look. That is how it's going to go. So now we have a full-on scene. We'll go back to the other geometry nodes editor, and we need to get a set material on all of these. And let's get those materials set up. But first, let's go ahead and do our lighting. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring this window over here for now. And we need to go ahead and I'm going to use Eevee. So I'm going to stick to Eevee here. And then I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion, bloom, screen space reflections, and motion blur for this scene. And then let's just go to view it in Eevee. So first off, I'm going to pick where I want my camera to be. So I'm going to say right about here. I'm going to get my camera, Control-Alt-0, snap it to view, something like this, and then I'm going to bring my camera to be, relatively wide angle. So if you click on the camera, you click on the little green camera icon, you bring it wide angle, and I'm going to hit G and middle click and go back in. That's going to give this guy this really grand sense of scale if we have this wide angle. And if I look at the angle in my original animations at 18, so we can go pretty wide. And then if we bring it in, it's going to give it this really, really cool fisheye effect. And once it's rendered, it'll give it this really grand look. So now that that's set up, we can go ahead and go to the rendered view and get a light, point light. I'm going to hit G to move it over. And then I want it over here because I want the light to hit it because my camera's pointing this way, so the light needs to hit it there as well. And then we'll bring up the brightness. So now that we have some brightness here, we can go ahead and bring the world brightness to black and then introduce some volume with the principled volume node. And then we're going to do 0.1. Oops, that is the world strength. Density. So 0.01. Something like this. And then what I'm going to do, first off, I'm going to bring it up a little bit. And then we need to go ahead and make it like a pale green. And then bring up the radius so it's a bigger, more soft light to fill out the scene better. And I like the way that it reacts. And then we're going to go ahead and duplicate that light and put it directly behind our object. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see either of these lights, but especially not this one. And then bring up the brightness on him. And then he can be nice and bright. And now we have some, really cool, interesting dynamic lighting to get this scene going with. Next up is adding materials. So what I want to do is make sure this guy's clicked on. We're going to get 3 materials. So click new. I'm going to double click and call him Big Ball. Or big sphere, whatever you want to call it. Small ball, and we'll call him wires. Those are the 3 objects that are existing here. And then we can go ahead and just make all of them just metallic to begin with. Of course, you're not seeing anything change. If this is your kind of first time using geometry nodes, you have to go ahead and open up that geometry nodes editor again and apply it here. So I know these just 2 little guys here, that's going to be the big ball. And so now you can see a change. And then the set that has the mesh to curve, curve to mesh stuff, that is going to be the wires. There we go. And then small ball to finish it off. So now we have this. We can resort to going and doing shading. So I'm going to go ahead and eliminate this window and turn this window into the shader editor. So actually, I'm just going to keep that original window. Sorry, guys. we're gonna go and shader editor and hit in. So right up here you can see your slots, which object is selected. We'll start with the big ball. What we need to do is go to the emission. So what we're gonna do is give it a strength of like 30. There we go. Now we can see some light. We can go ahead and get a color ramp and plug it here. And then for the color, I'm gonna go ahead and paste in the original hex code of my scene. You can use whatever orange you want or just kind of eyeball it. That's kind of where it's located on the color. And then we're gonna go and get a layer weight. And we're gonna use the facing because that's the most dramatic version of the layer weight. And then you can bring it in like this, and then bring up that brightness so it really glows nice. And you're not gonna get a glow unless in the Eevee settings you turn on bloom. And then you can just kind of play with this until you like what you see, and of course playing with your strength of your objects. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna highlight these guys and copy them or hit Control C. And we're gonna go to the small ball slot, give myself 100 on the brightness. I'm gonna hit Control V, hit G to move them over, and then just plug that into the color. So now we have all these guys. The problem is, this is ugly. I want them to be randomly around, not all of them lit up, right? So the way we can do that is I'm gonna go ahead, click on this guy, hit Shift D, and then bring your strength down to 0. We don't want him glowing. We just want him to be the same as him other than the glowing. We're going to get a mix shader and plug that into shader. And then what you can do is get a color ramp so we can, manipulate the texture we're about to plug into it. We're going to get a wave texture and a object info node. And the object info is going to be able to recognize all the individual little spheres that are up in here. So plug random into vector, plug wave into color ramp. And then I'm just going to bring up my distortion a little bit. And then we can bring in this color ramp. And you can see that it starts to randomly remove some. And then you can play with the phase to look at that animate. So you can just have like a couple and have this really, really awesome look. And in this case, you can start to bring up the brightness so those guys can shine nice and bright. And that's going to be you do want them to be bright so that the compositing, it kind of ignites on the compositing. So we do want some nice bright spheres, and you can adjust that as you go. And animating the wave texture in a loop is very, very, very easy. Now, last thing I want to do is on the wireframe, add a little bit. So I'm hit Control V as well. And we're going to add in another emission. So we'll do like 30. I remember this one needing to be very, very low light, very soft. So we're going to do hopefully wave texture can be nice and soft. Honestly, we are probably going to need to use the noise texture. I'm going to hit Control T with the Node Wrangler add-on. Plug that there. Plug him here. And then you'll notice if we just bring up that strength, we need to scale it down. So bring that scale like this. There we go. If we go here to 4D, you can actually see it working. Let it load. So play with the W, you can see that. So we want it even bigger. So let's bring that detail down. And I just want a couple places of random emission on the arms. And then you can just bring that strength down considerably. So that is just a very minor detail, but I think really just helps. You can see how the lines are lit up there, and kind of right here in the middle here, you can see like that. It's just a detail, but I think really makes the scene look really, really nice. Now, if you watch the original video, I said the scene feels a little empty. We need to add some hair particles to this. So let's go ahead and add those hair particles into the scene. So we're just going to get a random icosphere, make sure he's inside the original sphere so we don't see it. And I'm going to call him hair. And then we can go ahead and give it some hair. Turn into hair like that. Cool. And then you can bring the hair length up and bring the hair number down. So now if we go back into Eevee, There's our hair. We don't even need to play with the thickness of it. Like it's fine how it is, but we do want to make it look a little bit more turbulent. So what we want to do is here in the render, bring your steps up to 8. This is like your subdivision. And then on the viewport display as well, bring it up to 8 so that we get nice detail. And then what you want to do, Shift A, add in a force field, turbulence. And then you go right here to adjust. So if you bring like crazy turbulence, it's going to do that. But we just want a little bit, right? And then when it comes to animating the scene, all we'll have to do, I'm gonna hit R twice on the keyboard. And you can notice if you look at your screen, it is going to animate that. So you just animate it in a loop by rotating the turbulence by 360 degrees. Now that we have this, we're gonna add some compositing. So the first thing I wanna do that, might be in like the family of compositing effects is just a little bit of depth of field. So, which by compositing, I just mean like camera effects. So we'll bring that f-stop down to 0. And then let's look over here and bring that focus till we see this front portion nicely in focus. Or you can use an empty to tell it. And then I'm going to bring my f-stop to 0.2. So now we have this. Let's go ahead and add our compositing effects. So let's just bring up this timeline window and switch it over to the compositor. Very simple stuff here. Hit the drop down and click always so that we can see the compositing effects in our viewport. I'm gonna click use nodes. And let's go ahead and get in a lens. Actually, let's do the glare first. So glare node, switch it from streaks to ghosts. We're going to keep our iterations at 3. Let's bring that color mod up, and that's just going to kind of give it a little detail and crunch it in a little bit. And then we're going to do -0.9 on that, and then now you can play with it. So my original settings made this a little bit more obvious, so you can play with the threshold to make it a little bit brighter. But now if you like move your scene around, you have these really nice looking compositing effects. And if you want more compositing effects on the circles, what you would do is switch this over to the shader editor, click on this guy, and we'll go on the slots to small ball, and then bring up that brightness, and it's going to add more compositing effects for you. So that's how you do that. So if you want everything to be even brighter, you can. Now we're going to go back to the compositor. One thing I want to add is a hue saturation value node and bring up the saturation. I just like the way the saturation behaves in Blender on this particular color. It makes it look kind of gritty and vintagey and whatever. And then now we're going to add a final thing that's going to add some grit, and that's a lens distortion node. Plug it here, turn on jitter, and then to get it to work, I'm just going to do like 0.01, so it just barely affects it, because if you go all the way up, it's going to like stretch it out like that. I just want the noise to turn on. So see how, so if I bring this dispersion to 0, see how it looks like that? See how smooth it is? Now it created noise, and it just makes it look gritty and cool and kind of vintage. Now, in my personal preference, the compositing effects are a bit loud. I'm going to bring my compositor back and bring the glare to something like this. Really, the point of the glare is to add detail within the sphere. All right, so now we have this. There are some things we need to animate. The lights, which is on the spheres, the hair particles, and our camera, and the rotation. So let's go ahead and just animate those things. I'm giving myself a timeline and turn on the timeline here. So first let's animate the turbulence. I'm going to give myself 500 frames, and we'll go back to frame 0 so we don't have any duplicate frames. I'm just going to check in my preferences, make sure my animation interpolation is linear so that these loops work. And then right here in the rotations, I'm just going to click and drag, go to the very end, click and drag here and type in 360. And now you can see those guys are animating properly. So we like that. So now we have the hair animating. What I want to do now is animate the material on the lights. So we can just go ahead and create a new material window for that. Actually, we'll just go ahead and use the shading. Well, neither of them have a timeline, which is the problem. So we'll keep him here, and let's open up a new window here and open up the shader editor. Click on this guy, and then on the slot, make sure you have the small ball selected, and let's animate the wave texture. The wave texture is remarkably easy to loop in animate in a loop. With the phase offset, you'll just hit I, go to the very end, and in this case, you have to use an even number, so any even number. So I'm going to use 12 asterisk pi, and that is going to animate it, just like that. And that's going to animate doing its thing. If you want to know why that animates the way it does, I will be talking about kind of this and a bunch of other looping stuff at the Blender conference. So if you are going to the Blender conference, I will be doing a talk about sort of everything looping. So this is part of the topic. So if you're going, I will see you there. But this is kind of animating about doing its thing. Let's go ahead and animate this object here. Just very simple animation. So bring it back to frame 0. Click on this object, go here, make sure we have, yep, he's selected. So I'm just going to go and use these top 2 guys. Actually, no, bring these bottom 2, and then click and drag and type in 360, ensuring the loop. And there we go. We now have this guy animating, and he will be a full animated loop going through. So we like this. Now I want to animate the focal length of the camera to make it look like we're zooming in and zooming out on our lens. So the way we can add randomness to that is just by hitting a keyframe, just leaving it there. And I'm going to use the animation workspace here. And then what you're going to do is just right here, I already have it open, but go and get your graph editor. So switch it over to the graph editor. And then we're going to click on this guy and make sure you select, where is that? Oh, you got to click on your camera and then click on the focal length in the keyframes. And what I'm going to do is add a modifier and a noise. So if you look, we added noise and it's kind of barely moving. So if you bring up your strength, you can see it's doing that. Now my settings are 70 on the scale. So now you can see it's very slowly zooming in, zooming out. You can see that. And then on the strength of 18. So you can see we have a very slight, so we're zoomed out, and now we're going to zoom in at a very slow, smooth pace. And if you ever don't like what you got, you can just use phase and randomize the movement. The only problem we're going to get here is once we get to the end of the timeline, see that? It's not a loop anymore because the zooming kind of goofs up. So you need to restrict your frame range, tell it start at frame 1, end at frame 500, and just from my experience, a blend in and out of 30 gives you a perfect loop. So if we just bring it in here, does that. And it's kind of weird, so I'm going to play with my phase until we get something that's a little bit more reasonable on our zoom. So if we can just kind of view it. All right, it's reasonable. You can play with it more if you'd like. Maybe bring up that scale. Oh, this might actually be perfect right here. So he'll just come in. Yep, that's a lot better. Cool. All right. So that's just giving you a random zoom in and zoom out effect. And this animation is finished. We are all done. Now we can just go ahead. Let me try to export it and you can be on your way. So what we'll do is here on the format, the little printer icon, I would keep it at 1920 by 1080. If you want it 4K, just type in 200 or type in the exact pixels you want. And then here I'm going to go to, you can use a PNG sequence, but if you just want an MP4, like a finished video for yourself, you'll do FFmpeg video encoding to MP4, and then medium quality to perceptually lossless render animation. And of course, pick your file location. So there you go. That was a pretty hefty tutorial, but lots of just good nuggets to use in all the other places in your life. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is part of a multi animation series on Patreon. So if you do want to support me, that is the best way to do it. Tons and tons of content on the Patreon. If you want to check it out, that is linked in the description, along with the tutorials that are related to this project. So if you want to check it out, you can. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.